The automatic doors of the emergency room hissed open, and the December wind cut through the ambulance bay like a blade. Emily Warren didn't even make it 5 steps into the parking lot before the hand clamped around her throat. 1 second she was breathing, the next, her spine slammed against concrete, and a voice in her ear said, "Stay down!" She tried to speak, tried to point at the hospital ID clipped to her scrubs, but the arm around her windpipe only tightened. Somewhere beyond the ringing in her ears, phones appeared. Voices rose. A woman screamed, "She's a nurse!" Officer Derek Pullman didn't loosen his grip. He looked at Emily's badge, at the crowd, at the cameras, and he squeezed harder. Then the glass doors exploded open, and a man in surgical scrubs roared a name that made the entire scene go still. If you want to see how this story ends, how the truth comes out, how the tables turn, and how justice finally catches up, stick with me to the very end, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story has traveled. Emily Warren had been an ER nurse for 6 years, and she'd learned to measure time in compressions. 30 per minute, 2 inches deep. Don't stop until the monitor beeps or the doctor calls it. That was the rhythm of Pinehurst, Tennessee, a mid-sized town where the Riverside General Medical Center sat at the edge of downtown like a fortress made of cinder block and old promises. Tonight had been the kind of shift that left her scrubs damp with sweat and her hands shaking from adrenaline. A car accident on Route 9 had sent 3 patients through the doors within 20 minutes of each other. One of them, a 16-year-old kid with a skull fracture, had coded twice on her watch. Emily had kept him alive long enough for the airlift. By the time the helicopter's rotors faded into the winter sky, it was nearly midnight. She clocked out, pulled her coat tight, and stepped through the sliding doors into the cold. The parking lot was half empty. Overhead lights buzzed in their housings, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Emily inhaled deeply, letting the December air fill her lungs. 5 seconds. That was all she wanted. 5 seconds to remember what it felt like to stand still. She didn't get 3. The footsteps came fast, boots on pavement, heavy and deliberate. Before she could turn, a hand grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. Emily's back hit the concrete pillar near the ambulance bay, and the impact knocked the breath from her chest. "Don't move!" The voice was male, clipped, and utterly certain. Emily's eyes focused. The man in front of her wore a Pinehurst Police Department uniform, badge number 847 glinting under the floodlights. His hand was on her arm, fingers digging into the fabric of her coat. His other hand hovered near his belt. "What?" Emily started, but he cut her off. "I said don't move." Her brain scrambled to make sense of it. She'd walked out of the hospital. She'd been alone. She hadn't done anything. "I work here," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. She pointed at the ID badge clipped to her scrubs. "I'm a nurse. Emily Warren, RN." Officer Derek Pullman's eyes flicked to the badge. For a moment, Emily thought that would be the end of it. A mistaken identity, an apology, maybe even a laugh about the confusion. Instead, he grabbed her wrist and twisted it behind her back. Pain lanced up her shoulder. Emily gasped, and the sound seemed to trigger something in him. He stepped closer, crowding her against the pillar, and his forearm pressed across her collarbone. "I said shut up." The pressure on her throat increased. Emily's pulse spiked. She tried to pull back, but the pillar was solid behind her and Pullman's weight was immovable in front. Her vision started to narrow at the edges. Somewhere to her left, a car door slammed. "Hey!" a man's voice called. "What are you doing?" Pullman didn't turn. "Police business. Keep moving." But the man didn't move. Emily heard footsteps, 2 sets, maybe 3, and then a woman's voice joined the first. "That's a nurse. She works here." Pullman's jaw tightened. His arm pressed harder. Emily's lungs burned. She couldn't get air. She tried to twist away, but his grip was iron. The ID badge swung uselessly against her chest, and she realized with a cold, sinking clarity that he'd seen it. He knew exactly who she was, and he wasn't stopping. The footsteps grew closer. Emily heard the distinct chime of a phone camera starting to record. "Let her go!" someone shouted. Pullman finally moved, but not the way Emily hoped. He grabbed her badge and ripped it from the lanyard, holding it up like evidence. "Could be stolen?" he said, his voice loud enough for the growing crowd. "Could be fake." He dropped the badge onto the pavement. Emily's knees buckled. Black spots danced across her vision. She heard herself make a sound, half gasp, half plea, and hated how weak it sounded. Then the hospital doors burst open with a crash that made everyone flinch. "Get your hands off my wife!" The voice was thunder wrapped in ice. Pullman's grip loosened. Not much, but enough for Emily to drag in a shallow breath. She turned her head, tears blurring her vision, and saw him. Dr. Nathan Hale. He stood in the doorway, still in his surgical scrubs, a stethoscope around his neck and fury radiating from every line of his body. Nathan was the hospital's chief of operations, a man who'd spent 15 years moving between trauma bays and boardrooms with the same unshakable calm. Emily had never seen him lose his composure. Until now. Nathan crossed the parking lot in 4 strides, his eyes locked on Pullman. "Let her breathe. Now." Pullman hesitated. His arm was still across Emily's throat, but his attention had shifted. The crowd had grown, 10 people, maybe more, all holding phones. The light from their screens reflected in the puddles on the asphalt. Nathan stopped 2 feet away. His voice dropped, but the edge in it could have cut glass. "If you don't step back in the next 3 seconds, every person here is going to watch you choke an ER nurse on camera. Is that what you want?" For a moment, no one moved. Then Pullman shoved Emily away. She collapsed, and Nathan caught her before she hit the ground. His hands were steady, one under her arm, one bracing her back, and he lowered her gently until she was sitting on the cold pavement. "I've got you," he whispered, his voice stripped of the command it had held seconds earlier. "Just breathe." Emily sucked in air, her throat raw and aching. She heard Pullman's boots shifting on the asphalt, heard him say something about a disturbance call, about protocol, about doing his job. Nathan didn't look at him. He kept his hands on Emily, kept his eyes on hers, and he didn't move until her breathing steadied. Then he stood. "You're going to want to leave," Nathan said to Pullman. His voice was calm again, but there was something underneath it, something that made the crowd go quiet. Pullman straightened his uniform. "I was responding to a report." "Of what?" "Suspicious activity." Nathan's expression didn't change. "She walked out of the hospital where she works. That's not suspicious. That's a shift change." Pullman's hand drifted toward his radio. "I don't have to explain myself to you." "No," Nathan agreed. "But you will have to explain yourself to them." He nodded toward the crowd. At least 15 phones were recording now, their lenses pointed directly at Pullman. The officer's face flushed. He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned on his heel and walked toward his patrol car. He didn't run, but his stride was quick, purposeful. He got in, slammed the door, and pulled out of the parking lot with his lights off. The crowd watched him go. Then slowly they turned back to Emily. Nathan knelt beside her again. "Can you stand?" She nodded, though her legs felt like water. He helped her up, his hand firm on her elbow, and guided her back toward the hospital entrance. The automatic doors opened, and the warmth inside hit her like a wall. Security was already there. 2 guards and the night supervisor, a woman named Carol, who'd worked at Riverside General longer than Emily had been alive. Carol took one look at Emily's face and pulled out her radio. "I need the shift manager and the incident report forms. Now." Nathan didn't let go of Emily's arm until they reached the staff break room. He sat her down in one of the plastic chairs, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and handed it to her. "Drink," he said. Emily's hands were shaking too hard to twist the cap. Nathan took the bottle back, opened it, and pressed it into her hands. She drank. The water was cold and hurt going down, but it helped. She blinked, and the room came back into focus. Nathan was crouched in front of her, his expression tight with concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "My throat," she managed. Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a rasp. "And my wrist." Nathan's jaw clenched. He reached for her hand, gently turning it to inspect the red marks already blooming across her skin. "We need to document this. Photos, medical exam, the whole process." Emily nodded. She knew the protocol. She'd walked patients through it 100 times, domestic violence cases, assault cases, people who'd been hurt and needed proof. She'd never imagined she'd be on the other side of it. Carol appeared in the doorway with a clipboard and a camera. "The police are asking for a statement." "Not from Pullman's department," Nathan said immediately. We go through the county and we get everything on record. Security footage, witness statements, all of it. Carol nodded. Already pulling the tapes. Emily looked up at Nathan. Why did he do that? Nathan didn't answer right away. He stood, ran a hand through his hair, and exhaled slowly. I don't know, but we're going to find out. By the time Emily gave her statement to a county deputy, an older man with kind eyes who took notes in careful, blocky handwriting, it was nearly 2 a.m. Nathan stayed with her the entire time, his presence a steady anchor in a night that felt increasingly unreal. The deputy closed his notebook. We'll follow up with the Pinehurst PD, get Officer Pullman's report, match it against the footage and witness accounts. What happens if they don't match? Emily asked. The deputy's expression didn't change. Then we have a problem. He left, and the break room fell silent. Nathan pulled up a chair and sat across from Emily. You should go home. I don't know if I can drive. I'll take you. Carol can handle the paperwork. Emily looked at him, really looked at him. Nathan's face was drawn, his eyes shadowed with something she didn't have a name for. They'd been married for 3 years, together for 5, and she'd seen him handle every kind of crisis the ER could throw at him. But this was different. This wasn't a patient. This was her. I'm okay, she said, though they both knew it was a lie. Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. You're not. And that's okay too. They sat like that for a long time, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the hospital moving around them in its endless nocturnal rhythm. Neither of them knew it yet, but the footage was already spreading. A bystander had uploaded the first clip to social media within minutes of Pullman driving away. 30 seconds of shaky video, Emily pinned against the pillar, Pullman's arm across her throat, Nathan's voice cutting through the night like a blade. By the time Emily and Nathan left the hospital, the video had been shared 200 times. By sunrise, it would be everywhere. The first news van arrived at Riverside General just after 6 a.m. Emily was still at home, sitting at her kitchen table with a mug of tea she hadn't touched, when her phone started ringing. She didn't recognize the number, so she didn't answer. It rang again, and again. Nathan walked into the kitchen, his own phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call and looked at her. The video's viral. Emily's stomach dropped. How viral? 50,000 views and climbing. She set down the mug. Her hands were still shaking. What does that mean? Nathan sat down across from her. It means everyone's watching. The hospital, the police department, the media. Everyone. Emily closed her eyes. She'd spent the night replaying those moments in the parking lot. The pressure on her throat, the cold concrete, the certainty in Pullman's eyes that he could do whatever he wanted and no one would stop him. She'd been wrong about that last part. I want to press charges, she said. Nathan didn't hesitate. Okay. I mean it. I don't want a quiet settlement or an internal review. I want him to answer for what he did. Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. Then that's what we'll do. The news broke wide that afternoon. Not just the video, though that was everywhere, dissected and analyzed on every platform, but the details behind it. Emily's name, her job, the fact that she'd been leaving her shift at the hospital when Pullman grabbed her, and then buried in the 3rd paragraph of a news article that Emily almost didn't read, a detail that changed everything. Emily Warren wasn't just a nurse. She was a sergeant in the U.S. Army Reserve, a combat medic who'd served 2 tours overseas and had been decorated for her actions under fire. Emily stared at her phone, her pulse pounding in her ears. She'd kept that part of her life separate for so long, had compartmentalized it into something that belonged to a different version of herself. The hospital knew, of course. It was in her personnel file. But she didn't talk about it, didn't wear it like a badge. She didn't think it mattered. Nathan looked over her shoulder at the article. Did you tell them? No. Emily's voice was tight. I didn't tell anyone. But someone had. By evening, the story had shifted. It wasn't just about a nurse being assaulted by a police officer. It was about a veteran being choked in a hospital parking lot while trying to go home. The optics were devastating, and the military was paying attention. Emily's phone rang again. This time she recognized the number, her unit's commanding officer, Colonel Adrienne Park. She answered. Colonel, Sergeant Warren. Colonel Park's voice was crisp, professional. I've seen the footage. Are you all right? Emily's throat tightened. Yes, ma'am. Good. I need you to understand something. Your unit is currently stationed at Fort Campbell for a training rotation. We're 30 miles from Pinehurst. This incident occurred while you were off duty, but you're still a service member. That means the military has an interest in your welfare. Emily's heart started to pound. Ma'am, I don't want this to become a military matter. It already is, Colonel Park said gently. The moment that video went public, it became everyone's matter. Now, I'm not here to take over your case or interfere with civilian law enforcement, but I am here to make sure you're protected. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Good. I'm sending someone to check on you tomorrow. A JAG officer and a military police liaison. They're not there to take over. They're there to make sure the process is fair. Understood? Emily closed her eyes. Understood. Colonel Park paused. Sergeant, I'm proud of the work you've done, both in uniform and out. Don't let anyone make you feel like you were wrong for standing your ground. The call ended. Nathan was watching her from across the room. What did she say? They're sending people. Nathan's expression shifted, something between relief and concern. When? Tomorrow. Emily set down her phone and looked at her hands. The bruises on her wrist had deepened overnight, a palette of purple and yellow that made her stomach turn. She thought about Pullman, about the way he'd looked at her badge and dismissed it, about the way he'd tightened his grip even as the crowd grew. She thought about the 16-year-old kid she'd saved that night, the one who'd coded twice and lived because she wouldn't stop compressing his chest. She thought about all the people she'd saved, all the lives she'd held in her hands, and she wondered if Pullman had thought about any of that when he decided she didn't matter. The next morning, 2 vehicles pulled into the hospital parking lot just after 9. One was an unmarked sedan. The other was a military police SUV with Fort Campbell markings. Emily was already there, sitting in the hospital's HR office with Nathan beside her. She'd insisted on coming in, had told Nathan that she wasn't going to hide, wasn't going to let Pullman take her job away from her too. The HR director, a woman named Helen Ortiz, had agreed to meet them. She'd reviewed the footage, read the incident reports, and made it clear that Riverside General stood behind Emily completely. The hospital's legal team is already involved, Helen said. We're cooperating fully with the investigation, and we're making sure you have everything you need: medical documentation, witness statements, security footage. Emily nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about the vehicles outside, about the people who were about to walk through the door. She didn't have to wait long. The knock came at exactly 9:15. Helen stood and opened the door. 2 people stepped inside, a woman in a crisp army uniform with JAG insignia and a man in military police fatigues. The woman extended her hand. Captain Lena Torres, Judge Advocate General's Corps. This is Sergeant First Class Miguel Rivera, Military Police Liaison. Helen shook their hands, then gestured to Emily and Nathan. This is Emily Warren and her husband, Dr. Nathan Hale. Captain Torres's gaze settled on Emily, and her expression softened. Sergeant Warren, I want to be clear about why we're here. This is a civilian matter, and we're not here to interfere with local law enforcement. But you're a service member, and the Army takes the welfare of its personnel seriously. We're here to make sure you're supported and that the investigation is conducted fairly. Emily swallowed hard. Thank you, ma'am. Torres pulled out a tablet and set it on the table. I've reviewed the footage and the initial reports. I've also been in contact with the Pinehurst Police Department and the county prosecutor's office. There are some things you should know. Emily's pulse quickened. What things? Torres tapped the screen and a document appeared. Officer Derek Pullman has a history. Nathan leaned forward. What kind of history? Complaints, Torres said. 3 formal complaints filed against him in the past 2 years. None of them resulted in disciplinary action. Emily felt something cold settle in her chest. What were the complaints for? Torres scrolled through the document. Excessive force during a traffic stop, unlawful detention of a homeless veteran, verbal harassment of a delivery driver. She looked up. The details vary, but the pattern is consistent. Pullman has a problem with authority. Specifically, he doesn't respect it when it comes from people he doesn't think deserve it. Nathan's jaw tightened. And the department just ignored it? Not ignored, Torres said carefully. But the complaints were handled internally. No external review, no independent oversight. Each time, Pullman was given additional training and returned to duty. Emily's hands clenched into fists. So they knew. They knew he was doing this, and they let him keep his badge. Torres didn't answer. She didn't need to. Sergeant Rivera spoke for the first time, his voice low and steady. The difference now is the evidence. Video footage from multiple angles, medical documentation, witness statements. This isn't a he said, she said situation. This is undeniable. Emily looked at him. What happens next? The county prosecutor's office is reviewing the case, Torres said. They'll decide whether to file criminal charges. In the meantime, the Pinehurst PD has placed Pullman on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Nathan's expression darkened. Administrative leave? That's it? For now, Torres said. But that's where we come in. She tapped the tablet again, and another document appeared, this one with the seal of the Department of Defense at the top. We've requested a full copy of Pullman's complaint file from the Pinehurst PD, Torres said. They turned it over this morning. Emily's breath caught. They just gave it to you? Torres's smile was thin. When the military asks nicely, people tend to cooperate, especially when there's a federal interest involved. She turned the tablet around so Emily could see the screen. It was a list, pages and pages of incident reports, complaint forms, and internal memos. Emily's eyes scanned the text, and her stomach turned. Pullman's file was a roadmap of abuse. Complaints from civilians, reprimands from supervisors, notes about anger management training that had clearly done nothing. And buried in the middle of it all, a detail that made Emily's blood run cold. Pullman had been flagged for potential termination 18 months ago, but the recommendation had been overruled by a senior officer in the department. Emily looked up at Torres. They protected him. Torres nodded. Yes, they did. Nathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is unbelievable. They had a chance to stop him, and they didn't. And now it's public, Torres said quietly, which means they can't bury it anymore. Emily's hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from rage. She thought about the other people Pullman had hurt, the ones who'd filed complaints and been ignored, the ones who'd walked away with bruises and no justice. She thought about the fact that she could have been just another name in that file. But she wasn't, because this time people were watching. Torres closed the tablet. Sergeant Warren, I need to ask you something. Are you prepared to see this through? Because once the prosecutor files charges, this is going to get ugly. Pullman's going to have a lawyer. The police union's going to get involved. There will be people who try to discredit you, who'll say you're exaggerating or lying or looking for attention. Emily met her gaze. I'm prepared. Good, Torres said, because so are we. The days that followed were a blur. The video continued to spread, racking up millions of views and sparking protests outside the Pinehurst Police Department. Emily gave a formal statement to the county prosecutor, sat for a medical examination that documented every bruise and mark, and handed over her torn ID badge as evidence. Nathan stayed by her side through all of it, a quiet, steady presence that kept her grounded when everything else felt like chaos. And then, a week after the incident, the prosecutor's office announced its decision. Officer Derek Pullman would be charged with assault and battery, unlawful detention, and excessive use of force. The charges were criminal. And they carried the possibility of jail time. Emily was sitting in the kitchen when Nathan showed her the news alert. She read it twice, her eyes tracing the words over and over, and then she set down her phone and cried. Not from sadness, from relief. Nathan pulled her into his arms, and she let herself break, just for a moment, just long enough to remember what it felt like to be safe. When she pulled back, her eyes were clear. What happens now? She asked. Nathan wiped a tear from her cheek. Now we make sure he pays for it. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Emily walked into the courthouse with Nathan on one side and Captain Torres on the other, the weight of 100 cameras following her every step. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the gallery, their notebooks open and pens poised. Emily's co-workers from Riverside General sat in the front row, a silent wall of support. And in the back, Half hidden behind a pillar sat three people Emily didn't recognize. Torres leaned over and whispered, "Those are Pullman's other complainants. They wanted to be here." Emily's throat tightened. She turned and looked at them. A middle-aged man in a delivery uniform, an elderly woman with a cane, and a younger man in a faded army jacket. They looked back at her, and they nodded. The bailiff called the courtroom to order, and Emily forced herself to focus. Pullman sat at the defense table with his lawyer, a sharp-eyed man in an expensive suit. Pullman's face was blank, unreadable. He didn't look at Emily once. The hearing itself was procedural. Arguments about evidence, motions to suppress, the usual legal choreography. But when the prosecutor stood and began playing the video, the room went silent. Emily watched herself on the screen, watched Pullman grab her, twist her arm, press his forearm against her throat, watched Nathan burst through the doors and demand that he let her breathe, and she watched Pullman drop her badge like it was garbage. When the video ended, the prosecutor turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this is not a case of mistaken identity. This is not a case of split-second judgment. This is a case of deliberate, sustained violence against a nurse, a veteran, and a civilian who posed no threat. Officer Pullman saw her badge. He heard the witnesses. He knew exactly what he was doing." The judge's expression was unreadable. "I'll take it under advisement." The hearing adjourned, and Emily walked out of the courthouse into a wall of cameras and questions. Nathan steered her toward the car, his hand on her back, and they didn't stop until they were safely inside. Emily leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes. "It's not over," Nathan said quietly. "I know." But for the first time since that night in the parking lot, Emily felt like maybe, just maybe, it would be. The courthouse steps were slick with morning rain when Emily and Nathan emerged into the glare of waiting cameras. Questions came at them like bullets, shouted, overlapping, impossible to parse. Emily kept her eyes forward, her hand tight in Nathan's, and didn't stop walking until they reached the car. Nathan pulled out of the parking lot and the media vans followed. 3 of them peeled off at the first intersection, but 2 stayed on their tail all the way back to Riverside General. Nathan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "They're going to camp outside the hospital," he said. Emily stared out the window at the gray sky. Let them. She'd taken a week of leave after the incident. Mandatory, according to hospital policy, but Emily had fought it anyway. She didn't want time off. She wanted to work. Wanted to sink her hands into something concrete, something she could fix. But Helen Ortiz had been firm, and Captain Torres had agreed. So Emily had stayed home, watched the video go viral, and felt herself become a headline she couldn't control. Now the leave was over. Nathan parked in the staff lot, and they walked through the side entrance to avoid the cameras clustered near the main doors. Inside, the hospital felt different, quieter. People looked at Emily as she passed, their expressions careful and sympathetic, and she hated it. She didn't want sympathy, she wanted normalcy. Carol met them in the hallway outside the ER. "Welcome back." Emily managed to smile. "Thanks. There's a staff meeting at noon. Helen wants to address the situation." Nathan frowned. "What situation?" Carol hesitated. "The media presence, the hospital's getting calls, lots of them. Some supportive, some not. Helen wants to make sure everyone's on the same page." Emily's stomach tightened. "Not supportive how?" Carol's expression darkened. "People saying you're making it up for attention. People saying Pullman was just doing his job. The usual garbage." Nathan started to say something, but Emily cut him off. "It's fine. Let them say whatever they want." Carol gave her a long look. "You don't have to be tough all the time." "I'm not being tough," Emily said. "I'm being practical." She clocked in, changed into fresh scrubs, and walked into the ER. The shift was already in motion. 2 patients in triage, 1 in radiology, another waiting for a psych consult. Emily slipped into the rhythm without thinking, her hands moving through tasks she'd done 1,000 times. Check vitals, update charts, prep an IV. It felt good. It felt normal. Until she walked past the staff break room and heard her name. "I can't believe she's back already. I mean, I get it, but still." Emily stopped. The voice belonged to one of the newer nurses, a woman named Jenna, who'd started 6 months ago. Emily didn't dislike her, but they'd never been close. Another voice, male, one of the residents, responded. "You think she's milking it?" "I didn't say that." You didn't have to. Emily's pulse spiked. She took a breath, then pushed open the door. Jenna and the resident, a guy named Marcus, looked up, their faces flushing instantly. The break room went silent. Emily crossed to the coffee maker, poured herself a cup, and turned to face them. If you have questions about what happened, you can ask me directly. Jenna opened her mouth, closed it, then looked away. Marcus cleared his throat. We were just speculating, Emily finished. I know, everyone is. But here's the truth. I walked out of this hospital after my shift, and a cop choked me for no reason. That's it. That's the whole story. If you don't believe me, there's video. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I didn't mean, yes, you did. Emily's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. And that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. But don't talk about me like I'm not here. She walked out before either of them could respond. Her hands were shaking when she reached the nurse's station. She set down the coffee cup and gripped the edge of the counter, forcing herself to breathe. She'd known this would happen, had known that some people wouldn't believe her, that they'd find reasons to doubt or dismiss or diminish what Pullman had done. But knowing it and experiencing it were two different things. A hand touched her shoulder. Emily turned. It was one of the senior nurses, a woman named Diane, who'd been at Riverside General since before Emily was born. Diane's face was lined with age and exhaustion, but her eyes were kind. Don't let them get to you, Diane said quietly. They'll come around, or they won't. Either way, you're still standing. Emily nodded, not trusting her voice. Diane squeezed her shoulder once, then moved on. Emily stood there for a moment longer, then picked up her coffee and got back to work. The staff meeting at noon was exactly as awkward as Emily had anticipated. Helen stood at the front of the conference room, her expression professional but tense, and addressed the room with the kind of corporate precision that made Emily's teeth ache. As many of you are aware, Emily Warren was the victim of an assault in our parking lot last week. The incident was recorded, and the footage has been widely circulated. The hospital stands firmly behind Emily, and we are cooperating fully with law enforcement and legal proceedings. A few people nodded. Most just stared. Helen continued, I want to be clear. Any employee who engages in harassment, gossip, or retaliation against Emily will face disciplinary action. We expect professionalism and support from everyone on this staff. Are there any questions? Silence. Helen's gaze swept the room. Good. Let's get back to work. People filed out, their conversations muted and careful. Emily stayed in her seat, waiting for the room to empty. Nathan was beside her, his hand resting on the back of her chair. When the last person left, Helen walked over. How are you holding up? Emily shrugged. I'm here. That's not what I asked. Emily looked up at her. Helen's expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, concern, maybe, or solidarity. Emily wasn't sure which. I'm managing, Emily said finally. Helen nodded. If you need anything, time off, a schedule adjustment, anything, you let me know. I will. Helen left, and Emily and Nathan sat in the empty conference room, the silence pressing down around them. You don't have to stay, Emily said. Nathan shook his head. I'm not going anywhere. She leaned into him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They stayed like that for a long time, two people trying to hold steady, in the middle of a storm that showed no signs of stopping. The days bled together after that. Emily worked her shifts, ignored the stares, and focused on the parts of her job that still made sense. Patients didn't care about the video. They cared about their pain, their fear, their need for someone to tell them they'd be okay. Emily could do that. She was good at it. But outside the hospital, the pressure kept building. The media coverage intensified. News outlets picked up the story, dissecting every angle. Emily's military service became a focal point. Reporters dug up her deployment records, interviewed people from her unit, ran segments about veterans and police violence. Emily didn't watch any of it. She didn't need to. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her every time she left the house. And then the threats started. The first one came via email, an anonymous message sent to Emily's work account. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained a single sentence. You should have kept your mouth shut. Emily stared at the screen, her stomach churning. She forwarded the message to Helen and to Captain Torres, then deleted it from her inbox. The second one came 2 days later, this time as a handwritten note left on her car windshield in the hospital parking lot. The handwriting was jagged, angry. Cops have long memories. Emily brought the note inside and handed it to hospital security. They filed a report, added extra patrols to the lot, and told her to be careful. Emily nodded and went back to work. The third threat came as a phone call. Emily was at home making dinner when her cell rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello? Silence. Then breathing, slow, deliberate. Emily's grip tightened on the phone. Who is this? A voice, low and distorted, said, "You made a mistake." The line went dead. Emily stood in the kitchen, her heart hammering, and stared at the phone in her hand. Nathan walked in, took one look at her face, and crossed the room in 2 strides. "What happened?" Emily told him. Nathan's expression went dark, and he pulled out his own phone. "I'm calling Torres." "It's probably nothing." "It's not nothing." Nathan's voice was hard. "Someone's trying to scare you. We're not ignoring this." Captain Torres arrived at their house an hour later, along with Sergeant Rivera and a county detective named Marshall, who looked like he'd seen too many cases like this one. They sat in the living room and Emily recounted the emails, the note, the phone call. Torres took notes on her tablet, her expression grim. "This is escalating," Torres said, "and we need to treat it seriously." Marshall nodded. "I'll coordinate with Pinehurst PD to see if there's any connection to Pullman or his associates. In the meantime, you need to take precautions. Vary your routes. Don't post your location on social media. If you get another call or message, contact me immediately." Emily's throat felt tight. "You think Pullman's behind this?" Marshall exchanged a glance with Torres. "I think someone wants you to drop the case. Whether that's Pullman himself or someone acting on his behalf, we don't know yet, but we're going to find out." After they left, Emily sat on the couch and stared at the wall. Nathan sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "This is what they do," Emily said quietly. "They try to make you afraid. Try to make you feel like fighting back isn't worth it." Nathan turned to look at her. "Are you afraid?" Emily thought about it. About the hand on her throat, the concrete pillar, the cameras recording her gasping for air. About the emails and the note and the voice on the phone. "Yes," she said, "but I'm not stopping." Nathan took her hand. "Good." The next escalation came from a direction Emily hadn't anticipated. She was halfway through a night shift when Carol pulled her aside, her face pale. "We have a problem." Emily's stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" Carol handed her a printed email. It was addressed to the hospital's board of directors and copied to 6 local news outlets. The sender was listed as Concerned Citizens of Pinehurst. Emily scanned the text. Her hands started to shake. The email accused Emily of fabricating the assault. It claimed she had a history of filing false complaints, completely untrue, and suggested that she was using the incident to gain publicity and financial compensation. It ended with a demand that the hospital terminate her employment. Emily looked up at Carol. "This is insane." "I know. Helen's already drafting a response and the legal team is looking into it, but Emily—" Carol hesitated. "There's more." She pulled up a website on her phone and handed it to Emily. It was a petition. The header read, "Fire. Emily Warren, stop false accusations against our police." The petition had 3,000 signatures. Emily felt the room tilt. She handed the phone back to Carol, unable to look at it anymore. "Who's behind this?" Emily asked. "We don't know yet. The website's registered anonymously." Emily closed her eyes. She thought about the people who'd stood in the parking lot that night, who'd recorded the video, who'd shouted for Pullman to let her go. She thought about the footage that had been watched by millions of people. And she thought about the 3,000 signatures calling for her to be fired. "I need to get back to work," Emily said. Carol caught her arm. "Emily, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." She pulled away and walked back to the ER. Her hands were steady, her mind was clear, and she didn't stop moving until her shift ended at 6 in the morning. Nathan was waiting for her in the parking lot, parked under one of the floodlights. Emily got into the passenger seat, and he handed her a cup of coffee without a word. They drove in silence for a while. Then Nathan said, "Torres called. The prosecutor's office set a trial date." Emily looked at him. When? 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Emily did the math in her head. 6 weeks of this. Of the media, the threats, the petition, the whispers. 6 weeks of waiting to see if the system that had protected Pullman for years would finally hold him accountable. She took a sip of coffee. It was bitter and too hot, and it burned all the way down. "We can do 6 weeks," she said. Nathan reached over and took her hand. "Yeah, we can." But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. 3 days later, Emily was restocking supplies in the ER when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Check the news." Emily's pulse quickened. She pulled up a local news site, and the headline made her blood run cold. Officer Derek Pullman files defamation. Lawsuit against Emily Warren and Riverside General Medical Center. Emily read the article twice, her hands trembling. Pullman's lawsuit claimed that Emily had knowingly made false statements about the incident in the parking lot, that the viral video had been edited to make him look bad, and that the hospital had conspired with her to destroy his career and reputation. He was seeking damages in the amount of $2 million. Emily's vision blurred. She set down her phone and gripped the counter, forcing herself to breathe. This was retaliation, pure and simple. Pullman couldn't fight the criminal charges, so he was coming after her in civil court, trying to bury her in legal fees, trying to make her life so miserable that she'd drop the case just to make it stop. Her phone rang. "Captain Torres." Emily answered. "I saw it." "I know." Torres's voice was tight with controlled anger. "This is a slap suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's designed to intimidate you into silence. But Emily, listen to me. This changes nothing. The criminal case moves forward regardless of what Pullman files in civil court." "What do I do?" "You let the hospital's lawyers handle it. They're already drafting a motion to dismiss, and you keep living your life. Don't let him win by making you afraid." Emily closed her eyes. "Too late for that." Torres was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Fear's not the problem, Sergeant. Letting it stop you is." The call ended, and Emily stood in the middle of the ER, surrounded by the hum of monitors and the distant sound of voices, and she felt the weight of everything pressing down on her. She'd been assaulted, threatened, slandered, and now she was being sued for telling the truth. But when her next patient arrived, a construction worker with a compound fracture, Emily washed her hands, put on fresh gloves, and got to work. Because that was what she did. That was who she was. And Derek Pullman wasn't going to take that away from her. The lawsuit became another front in a war Emily hadn't asked for. The hospital's legal team filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that Pullman's claims were baseless and that the video evidence alone disproved his allegations. But the process was slow, bureaucratic, and exhausting. Emily had to sit for depositions, answer questions from Pullman's lawyer, a man who spoke in smooth, condescending tones and treated her like a liar, and relived the worst night of her life over and over again. Nathan was with her for every deposition, sitting in the corner of the conference room with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. Afterward, he'd drive her home in silence, and they'd sit on the couch until the sun went down, and neither of them had the energy to move. But the criminal case was moving too. The county prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Andrea Liu, called Emily in for a meeting 2 weeks before the trial. They met in her office downtown, a cramped space with stacks of case files and a window that looked out over the parking lot. Liu got straight to the point. "Pullman's lawyer is going to argue that you escalated the situation, that you were combative, that you resisted lawful commands, that he had reasonable cause to restrain you." Emily's stomach twisted. "That's a lie." "I know, but they're going to say it anyway. So I need you to be ready. The defense is going to try to put you on trial instead of Pullman. They're going to dig into your background, your service record, anything they can use to make you look aggressive or unstable." Nathan leaned forward. "Can they do that?" Liu nodded. "They can try. My job is to make sure the jury sees the truth, and the truth is in the video." She pulled up the footage on her laptop and turned the screen toward them. Emily had seen it dozens of times by now, but it never got easier. Watching herself pinned against the pillar, watching Pullman's arm tighten around her throat, watching her badge fall to the ground. Liu paused the video at the moment Pullman looked directly at the camera. His face was visible, clear, and unmistakable, and his expression was cold. "This is what the jury's going to see," Liu said. "Not a cop making a split-second decision, a man making a choice." Emily swallowed hard. "What if they don't believe me?" Liu met her gaze. "Then we make them." The trial was set to begin on a Monday in late February. Emily woke up that morning to find the street outside her house lined with news vans. Nathan cursed under his breath and pulled the curtains closed. "We'll go out the back," he said. They drove to the courthouse in silence, Captain Torres following in a separate vehicle. The building was surrounded by protesters, some holding signs in support of Emily, others waving thin blue line flags and chanting slogans about backing the badge. Police barricades kept the group separated, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Emily sat at the prosecutor's table, her hands folded in her lap, and tried not to look at the gallery. She could feel the weight of all those eyes on her, could hear the murmur of voices even after the bailiff called for order. And then Pullman walked in. He looked different in a suit, smaller somehow, less imposing. But when his eyes met Emily's across the courtroom, she saw the same coldness she'd seen that night in the parking lot. He didn't look away. Neither did she. The judge entered and the trial began. Liu's opening statement was precise and devastating. She walked the jury through the timeline, Emily leaving the hospital, Pullman grabbing her, the witnesses, the video. She showed them the footage, and the courtroom went silent. When the video ended, Liu turned to the jury. Officer Pullman had every opportunity to stop. He saw Emily Warren's hospital badge. He heard the witnesses. He knew she wasn't a threat, but he made a choice. And that choice is why we're here today. Pullman's lawyer stood for his opening statement, and Emily's stomach clenched. The man was older, silver-haired, with the kind of polished confidence that came from winning cases. He spoke in calm, measured tones, painting Pullman as a dedicated officer who'd been put in an impossible situation. Officer Pullman responded to a call about suspicious activity near the hospital, the lawyer said. He approached the individual, who was not wearing visible identification, and attempted to secure the scene. Miss Warren became combative. She resisted his lawful commands. And when Officer Pullman used reasonable force to maintain control, she and her husband turned it into a media spectacle. Emily's hands clenched into fists under the table. Liu didn't react, didn't even blink. The lawyer continued, "This is not a case about excessive force. This is a case about a police officer doing his job in a high-stress environment, and it's a case about a woman who saw an opportunity to profit from a viral video." He sat down, and the courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge banged his gavel. "Order!" Emily felt Nathan's hand on her shoulder, grounding her. She took a breath and forced herself to focus. The first witness was one of the bystanders, the man who'd shouted for Pullman to let Emily go. He testified clearly, recounting what he'd seen, and Liu played his cell phone video for the jury. The footage matched the other clips perfectly. The second witness was the elderly woman with the cane, one of Pullman's prior complainants. She took the stand slowly, her voice shaking but steady. "He grabbed my arm during a traffic stop," she said. "Twisted it behind my back because I asked to see his badge number. I filed a complaint, but nothing happened." Pullman's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed the testimony. Emily watched the jury, saw the way their expressions shifted. The third witness was Nathan. He took the stand in his hospital scrubs. He'd come straight from a shift, and Liu led him through his account of that night. Nathan's voice was calm, but Emily could see the tension in his shoulders. "I heard shouting," Nathan said. "I looked outside and saw Officer Pullman restraining my wife. I ran out and told him to let her breathe. He hesitated, then shoved her away. She collapsed." Pullman's lawyer stood for cross-examination. "Dr. Hale, you and your wife have a financial interest in the outcome of this case, don't you?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "No. You're both plaintiffs in a defamation lawsuit filed by Officer Pullman. If he's convicted here, it strengthens your defense in that case. Isn't that true?" "We didn't file that lawsuit. He did." The lawyer smiled thinly. "But you stand to benefit if he's found guilty." Nathan leaned forward. "I stand to benefit if my wife gets justice." The courtroom went still. The lawyer moved on, but the damage was done. The jury had seen Nathan's anger, his protectiveness, and they'd seen that it was genuine. The trial continued for 3 days. Witness after witness took the stand. The medical examiner testified about Emily's injuries. The hospital security chief presented footage from the parking lot cameras. And on the 3rd day, Liu called Emily to the stand. Emily walked to the witness box, raised her right hand, and swore to tell the truth. Liu started with the basics: Emily's background, her training, her service record. Then she moved to the night of the incident. "Tell the jury what happened when you left the hospital," Liu said. Emily took a breath. "I walked outside to go to my car. I got maybe 10 feet before Officer Pullman grabbed me. He spun me around and slammed me against a concrete pillar. I tried to tell him I was a nurse, tried to show him my badge, but he twisted my wrist and told me to shut up." "What did you do?" "I tried to breathe, but his arm was on my throat and I couldn't get air." Liu nodded. "Did Officer Pullman see your badge?" "Yes. He looked directly at it, then ripped it off my lanyard and dropped it on the ground." "What happened next?" "My husband came out. He told Officer Pullman to let me go. Pullman shoved me and I collapsed." Liu let the silence stretch. Then she said, "Ms. Warren, why are you here today?" Emily looked at the jury. "Because what he did was wrong, and because if I don't stand up, he'll do it to someone else." Pullman's lawyer stood for cross-examination, and Emily braced herself. "Miss Warren, you served in the Army, correct?" "Yes." "You were trained in combat situations, hand-to-hand combat, defensive tactics. I was a medic, not infantry." The lawyer smiled. "But you have training in physical confrontation." "Basic training? Yes. So you knew how to resist an officer's commands if you wanted to." Emily's pulse spiked. "I didn't resist. I asked him to let me breathe." "But you could have resisted if you'd chosen to." Liu stood. "Objection, speculation." Sustained. The lawyer shifted tactics. "Ms. Warren, you filed a lawsuit against Officer Pullman for defamation. Is that correct?" "No. He filed a lawsuit against me." "But you're defending yourself. You're seeking damages." "I'm defending myself against false accusations." The lawyer leaned against the defense table. "And if Officer Pullman is convicted here, that helps your case, doesn't it?" Emily met his gaze. "I'm not here for money. I'm here because he choked me in a parking lot and got away with it for as long as he did because no one held him accountable." The lawyer opened his mouth, then closed it. He glanced at the jury, then back at Emily. "No further questions," he said. Emily stepped down, her legs shaking, and returned to her seat. Liu gave her a small nod. The trial concluded the next day. Closing arguments were brief. Liu reminded the jury of the evidence, the videos, the witnesses, the medical reports. Pullman's lawyer reminded them of reasonable doubt. Then the jury left to deliberate. Emily and Nathan waited in a small conference room down the hall. Captain Torres brought them coffee. Sergeant Rivera checked in every hour. The minutes crawled past like hours. And then, after 3 hours of deliberation, the bailiff appeared in the doorway. "They have a verdict." Emily's heart stopped. She stood, her legs unsteady, and walked back into the courtroom. The jury filed in, their faces unreadable. The judge took his seat. The foreman stood. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." Emily held her breath. The foreman unfolded a piece of paper and read, "In the matter of the state versus Derek Pullman, we find the defendant guilty of assault and battery, guilty of unlawful detention, guilty of excessive use of force." The courtroom erupted. Emily heard Nathan's sharp exhale beside her, felt his hand grip hers. She heard voices, shouting, crying, a roar of noise that made her ears ring. The judge banged his gavel. "Order, order in the court." But Emily wasn't listening anymore. She was staring at Pullman, watching his face drain of color, watching his lawyer lean over to whisper something urgent in his ear. And for the first time since that night in the parking lot, Emily saw fear in Derek Pullman's eyes. The judge set a sentencing hearing for 2 weeks later, then adjourned the court. Emily stood on shaking legs, and Nathan pulled her into his arms. Captain Torres appeared beside them, her expression fierce with satisfaction. "You did it," Torres said quietly. Emily shook her head. "We did it." Outside the courthouse, the crowd was still shouting, some in celebration, some in anger. Emily and Nathan pushed through to the car, cameras flashing, questions flying. They didn't stop until they were safely inside, the doors locked, the engine running. Nathan pulled out of the parking lot, and they drove in silence. Emily leaned her head against the window and watched the city blur past. She thought about the verdict, about the look on Pullman's face, about the 3 hours the jury had spent deciding whether to believe her. And she thought about the voice on the phone that had told her she'd made a mistake. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Emily's stomach dropped. She opened it with trembling hands. The message was a single photograph. Emily's house, taken from across the street. No caption, no explanation, just the image and the threat it implied. Emily showed the phone to Nathan. His jaw clenched, and he immediately called Detective Marshall. But as they drove through the darkening streets of Pinehurst, Emily stared at the photo and felt the victory of the verdict slip through her fingers like sand. Because whoever had sent that message wanted her to know one thing. This wasn't over. Not even close. Detective Marshall arrived at their house 20 minutes later with 2 patrol units. The officers spread out across the street, checking sight lines and camera angles while Marshall examined the photo on Emily's phone. His expression was grim. "This was taken today. Same angle as your living room window." Nathan's voice was tight. "So someone's watching the house." Marshall nodded. "We'll do a sweep of the neighborhood, check for surveillance equipment, canvass the neighbors. In the meantime, you two need to stay somewhere else tonight." Emily shook her head. "I'm not leaving my house." "Emily," Nathan started. "No." Her voice cut through the room like a scalpel. "Pullman wants me scared, wants me hiding. I'm not giving him that." Marshall exchanged a look with Nathan. "This isn't about pride. Someone took this photo and sent it to you hours after a guilty verdict. That's escalation. We need to take it seriously." "I am taking it seriously," Emily said. "But I'm not running." Marshall sighed. "Then we station an officer outside. 24-hour surveillance until we figure out who sent this." Emily wanted to argue, but the exhaustion hit her all at once. The trial, the verdict, the photograph. She nodded, and Marshall made the call. Within an hour, a patrol car was parked at the curb, and motion sensor lights had been installed at every entrance. Nathan walked through the house checking locks while Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photo on her phone. The angle was deliberate. Whoever took it had stood directly across the street, in full view of anyone looking, and captured the image in daylight. They weren't hiding. They wanted Emily to know they'd been there. Nathan sat down across from her. "We should stay at a hotel." "We're staying here." "Emily, if we leave, they win." She looked up at him, and her eyes were hard. "I've already lost enough. I'm not losing my home, too." Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was warm, steady. "Okay, we stay." They didn't sleep that night. Emily lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Nathan dozed fitfully beside her, his phone on the nightstand within reach. Every sound, the creak of the house settling, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog, made her pulse spike. At 3 a.m, her phone buzzed. Emily grabbed it, her heart hammering. Another unknown number. The text contained a single word: soon. She showed it to Nathan. He called Marshall immediately, but by the time the detective arrived, there was nothing to trace. The number was a burner, already disconnected. Marshall stood in their living room, his face pale under the overhead light. "We need to escalate this. I'm bringing in the FBI." Nathan frowned. "The FBI? For threats?" "For targeted harassment of a witness in a federal interest case." Marshall looked at Emily. "You're a military service member. That gives us jurisdiction. And frankly, I don't trust Pinehurst PD to handle this objectively." Emily's stomach twisted. "You think it's someone inside the department?" Marshall didn't answer directly. "I think we need people who aren't invested in protecting Pullman's reputation." 2 days later, Emily sat across from FBI Special Agent Carla Mendez in a conference room at the Pinehurst field office. Mendez was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and direct, with the kind of presence that made people sit up straight without being told. "We've analyzed the phone records and the photo metadata," Mendez said. "The text came from burner phones purchased with cash at different locations across the county. The photo was taken with a smartphone, but the EXIF data's been stripped. Whoever's doing this knows how to cover their tracks. Emily's hands tightened on the armrests. What about Pullman? He's been under house arrest pending sentencing, ankle monitor, restricted movement. He didn't take that photo himself, but someone close to him could have. Mendez nodded. We're looking into his associates, family, friends, colleagues, anyone with motive to intimidate you. Nathan leaned forward. What about the police union? Mendez's expression shifted slightly. That's delicate territory. But yes, we're aware of the statements they've made. Emily had seen those statements. The Pinehurst Police Union had released a press statement after the verdict, calling it a miscarriage of justice and pledging to support Pullman's appeal. The statement had stopped short of directly attacking Emily, but the implication was clear. She was the problem, not Pullman. How long until you find who's doing this? Emily asked. Mendez met her gaze. I can't give you a timeline, but I can tell you we're treating this as a priority. In the meantime, maintain your security protocols. Don't engage with unknown numbers. Report anything suspicious immediately. Emily nodded, though the knot in her stomach didn't loosen. They left the field office and drove back to Riverside General. Emily had insisted on working, needed the routine, the normalcy, but every shadow in the parking lot made her flinch. The patrol car followed them to the hospital entrance, and the officer inside gave a small wave as they passed. Inside, the ER was chaos. A multi-car pileup on the interstate had sent 8 patients through the doors in the span of 20 minutes. Emily threw herself into the work, her hands moving on autopilot, IV lines, trauma assessments, vitals every 15 minutes. It was easier to focus on broken bones and internal bleeding than on the threats sitting in her phone. She was suturing a laceration on a teenager's forehead when Diane appeared beside her. You have a visitor, Diane said quietly. Emily didn't look up. Tell them I'm busy. It's Captain Torres. Emily's hands stilled. She finished the last stitch, applied a dressing, and found Torres waiting in the staff hallway. The captain's expression was unreadable. Walk with me, Torres said. They stepped outside into the cold February air. The parking lot was half full, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. Torres led Emily to a bench near the ambulance bay and sat down. I got a call from Fort Campbell this morning, Torres said. Your unit's being deployed. Emily's breath caught. When? 60 days. 60 days. 2 months. Emily's mind raced. She was part of the reserve, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, unless activated. Deployment meant leaving Nathan, leaving the trial aftermath, leaving everything. Where? Emily asked. Torres hesitated. I can't say yet, but it's a 12-month rotation. 12 months. A year away from everything she'd fought for, everything she'd endured. Emily stared at the parking lot, at the spot where Pullman had pinned her against the pillar, and felt something crack inside her chest. I can't go, she said. Torres turned to look at her. You don't have a choice. You're activated. You go. I have the sentencing hearing in 2 weeks. I have the defamation lawsuit. I have people threatening me. And you'll have the full support of the military legal system while you're deployed, Torres said firmly. The sentencing will happen whether you're there or not. The lawsuit will proceed, and the FBI will continue their investigation. Emily shook her head. If I leave, Pullman wins. Everyone will say I ran away, that I couldn't handle the pressure. Torres's voice softened. No one who matters will say that. You're being called to serve, Emily. That's not running, that's duty. Emily wanted to argue, wanted to scream that she'd already served, already sacrificed, already paid enough, but the words stuck in her throat. Torres stood. You have 60 days, use them. Make sure everything here is settled before you go. She walked away, leaving Emily alone on the bench. When Emily told Nathan that night, he went very still. They were sitting at the kitchen table, dinner untouched between them, and the silence stretched until it felt like a physical thing. 12 months, Nathan finally said. Emily nodded. Nathan ran a hand over his face. We'll make it work. I don't want to leave you with all of this. You're not leaving me with it. You're being deployed. There's a difference. Emily looked at him, at the exhaustion etched into his face, the worry he tried to hide. I'm sorry. Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. Don't apologize for serving your country. We'll figure it out. But that night, lying in bed with Nathan's arm around her, Emily stared into the darkness and felt the weight of everything pressing down. The trial, the threats, the deployment. It felt like the universe was trying to break her, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. Her phone buzzed. Emily reached for it, her stomach clenching. Another unknown number. Another message. This time, it wasn't a photo or a vague threat. It was an address. Emily stared at the screen, her pulse hammering. The address was familiar. She'd seen it in the case files. It was Derek Pullman's home address. Below the address, another line of text. Come alone if you want answers. Emily's hands started to shake. She turned to wake Nathan, then stopped. The message said, come alone. If she told Nathan, he'd insist on going with her. He'd call Marshall, call Torres, call everyone. And whoever sent this message would disappear. Emily sat up slowly, careful not to disturb Nathan. She pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt, grabbed her keys, and slipped out of the bedroom. The patrol car was still parked at the curb. Emily walked past it, keeping to the shadows, and got into her own car 2 houses down. She started the engine and pulled out quietly, watching the rearview mirror until the officer's headlights faded into the distance. Pullman's house was on the east side of Pinehurst, in a neighborhood of modest split levels and chain-link fences. Emily parked a block away and walked the rest of the distance, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The house was dark except for a single light in the front window. Emily approached slowly, every instinct screaming at her to turn back. This was insane. Dangerous. Exactly the kind of thing that got people hurt. But she kept walking. She reached the front door and raised her hand to knock. Before her knuckles touched wood, the door swung open. A woman stood in the doorway. She was in her 60s, thin and pale, with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she held a tissue in one trembling hand. "You're Emily Warren," the woman said. It wasn't a question. Emily nodded slowly. "Who are you?" "Linda Pullman, Derek's mother." Emily's stomach dropped. She took a step back, but Linda raised a hand. "Please, I need to talk to you." Emily's first instinct was to run, but something in Linda's voice, desperation maybe, or grief, made her hesitate. "Why did you send me those messages?" Emily asked. Linda's face crumpled. "I didn't, but I know who did." She stepped aside and Emily saw into the living room. Sitting on the couch, arms crossed and expression defiant, was a man in his late 20s. He had Derek Pullman's eyes. "My other son," Linda said quietly. "Ryan." Ryan stood and Emily saw the resemblance clearly now. Same build, same jawline, same cold stare. "You got my brother convicted," Ryan said. Emily's hands clenched into fists. "Your brother assaulted me. He was doing his job. He choked me in a parking lot for no reason." Ryan took a step forward, and Linda moved between them. "Ryan, stop." He glared at his mother, then at Emily. "She ruined his life." "He ruined his own life," Linda said, her voice breaking. "And you made it worse with those messages." Emily's pulse spiked. "You sent the threats." Ryan's expression didn't change. "I wanted you to know what it feels like. To be scared. To have people watching you." "Ryan," Linda pleaded, "please." But he ignored her, his attention fixed on Emily. "Derek's going to prison because of you. His career's over. His reputation's destroyed. And you're just going to walk away like you didn't do anything." Emily met his gaze, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. "I didn't do anything. Your brother did. He grabbed me. He choked me. He ignored my badge and the witnesses and kept going because he thought he could get away with it. I didn't ruin his life. I just made sure he faced consequences." Ryan's jaw tightened. "You should have kept your mouth shut." "And if I had, who would he have hurt next?" The question hung in the air. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. Something flickered across his face. Doubt, maybe, or shame. Linda stepped toward Emily, her eyes pleading. "I didn't know he was doing this until yesterday. I found the burner phones, confronted him. He admitted everything, the messages, the photo, all of it." Emily's mind raced. "You brought me here to tell me this?" I brought you here to apologize. Linda's voice cracked. And to ask you not to press charges against him. Emily stared at her. Are you serious? He's my son. He made a mistake. He threatened me, Emily said, her voice rising. He sent me photos of my house. He told me something bad was going to happen soon. That's not a mistake. That's terrorism. Ryan stepped forward again, and this time Linda didn't stop him. You want to destroy my whole family? I want to be left alone, Emily said. I want to live my life without wondering if someone's going to hurt me because I told the truth. Linda's face collapsed. She sank onto the couch, sobbing into her hands. Ryan stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. Emily pulled out her phone and called Detective Marshall. I'm at Derek Pullman's house, she said when he answered, and I found who's been sending the threats. Marshall arrived with 2 FBI agents and 3 patrol units. Ryan Pullman was arrested in his mother's living room, read his rights, and led out in handcuffs. Linda wept on the couch, begging Emily to reconsider, to show mercy, to understand. Emily didn't respond. She gave her statement to Marshall, handed over her phone as evidence, and watched as the agents searched the house and collected the burner phones. When they were done, Marshall walked Emily to her car. You shouldn't have come here alone. I know. You could have been hurt. I know. Emily looked back at the house, at Linda Pullman's silhouette in the window. But I needed to face it, needed to know who was trying to scare me. Marshall nodded slowly. Ryan Pullman's looking at federal charges. Witness intimidation, harassment, stalking. He's going away for a while. Emily felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. Good. She drove home in silence, the adrenaline slowly draining from her system. When she pulled into the driveway, Nathan was standing on the front porch, his phone in his hand and panic written across his face. He ran to the car before she could even turn off the engine. Where the hell were you? Emily got out, and Nathan pulled her into his arms. I woke up, and you were gone. The officer said you left hours ago. I've been calling. I'm sorry, Emily whispered. I had to do something. She told him everything, the message, Linda Pullman, Ryan's arrest. Nathan listened, his jaw tight, and when she finished, he didn't yell or lecture. He just held her tighter. Don't ever do that again, he said quietly. I won't. They went inside, and Emily finally let herself collapse. She sat on the couch while Nathan made tea, and when he handed her the mug, her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. It's over, Nathan said. The threats, the messages, it's done. Emily nodded, but she couldn't shake the image of Linda Pullman crying on her couch, begging for mercy for a son who didn't deserve it. The sentencing hearing was held on a gray Thursday morning 2 weeks later. Emily sat in the front row of the courtroom gallery, Nathan beside her and Captain Torres on her other side. The room was packed again. Reporters, supporters, protesters. The tension was thick enough to taste. Derek Pullman was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. He'd lost weight since the trial, and his face was pale and drawn. He didn't look at Emily as he sat down. The judge entered, and the room went silent. The prosecutor stood first, outlining the severity of Pullman's crimes and the impact on Emily. Then Pullman's lawyer made his plea for leniency, citing Pullman's years of service and lack of prior criminal convictions. Emily listened, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Then the judge spoke. Mr. Pullman, you were given authority and trust as a police officer. You swore an oath to protect and serve. Instead, you used that authority to assault a nurse, a veteran, a civilian who posed no threat. You saw her identification, you heard witnesses, you had every opportunity to stop, and you chose not to. Pullman's lawyer started to stand, but the judge held up a hand. This court has reviewed your complaint history. 3 formal complaints in 2 years, all alleging excessive force or unlawful conduct. Each time you were given training and returned to duty. Each time the department chose to protect you instead of the public. The judge leaned forward. That pattern ends here. He read the sentence, 5 years in state prison for assault and battery, 3 years for unlawful detention, and 2 years for excessive use of force. The sentences would run consecutively. 10 years total. The courtroom erupted. Pullman's face went white. His lawyer leaned over, whispering urgently. Linda Pullman sobbed in the back row. Emily sat frozen, the number echoing in her head. 10 years. Derek Pullman would be behind bars until he was nearly 50. His career was over. His life, as he knew it, was finished. The judge continued. Additionally, Mr. Pullman, your peace officer certification is permanently revoked. You will never work in law enforcement again, and upon your release, you will be subject to supervised probation for an additional 5 years. He banged the gavel. This court is adjourned. Pullman was led away, and Emily watched him go. She expected to feel triumph, vindication, satisfaction. Instead, she just felt exhausted. Nathan took her hand. It's done. Emily nodded. It's done. They left the courthouse and drove to Riverside General. Emily had one more shift before her deployment orders kicked in. 60 days had shrunk to 3. Inside the hospital, life continued as it always had. Patients arrived, were treated, discharged. The ER hummed with its familiar rhythm. Emily moved through it like a ghost, performing her duties mechanically. At the end of her shift, Helen called her into the office. I wanted to give you this before you leave, Helen said, handing Emily an envelope. Inside was a letter on hospital letterhead. Emily skimmed it. Words like exemplary service and courage under pressure and valued member of our team. At the bottom, Helen's signature, along with the signatures of every department head. We're proud of you, Helen said, and we'll be here when you get back. Emily's throat tightened. Thank you. She left the hospital as the sun was setting, the envelope clutched in her hand. Nathan was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against the car. When he saw her face, he didn't ask questions. He just opened the passenger door and let her get in. They drove home in silence. That night, Emily packed her deployment bag, uniforms, boots, medical supplies. She moved methodically, trying not to think about the 12 months ahead, the distance, the uncertainty. Her phone buzzed, a text from Captain Torres. Final briefing tomorrow at 0800, Fort Campbell. Don't be late. Emily set down the phone and sat on the edge of the bed. Nathan appeared in the doorway, watching her. You okay? He asked. Emily looked up at him. No, but I will be. Nathan crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet darkness. The next morning, Emily drove to Fort Campbell. The briefing was routine. Deployment logistics, mission parameters, equipment checks. But at the end, Colonel Park pulled her aside. I heard about the sentencing, Park said. 10 years. That's significant. Emily nodded. It is. Park studied her for a moment. You did something important, Sergeant. You stood your ground. You fought back. That takes courage. It took a lot of people, Emily said. I didn't do it alone. Park smiled slightly. The best fights never are. Emily left Fort Campbell and drove back to Pinehurst. She had 2 days left before deployment. 2 days to say goodbye to Nathan, to her coworkers, to the life she'd built. But when she pulled into her driveway, she found something waiting on her doorstep. A package wrapped in brown paper with no return address. Emily's pulse spiked. She called Nathan, who came outside immediately. They stared at the package together. Should we call Marshall? Nathan asked. Emily shook her head. She knelt down, carefully peeled back the paper, and opened the box. Inside was a single item, a thin blue line flag folded into a triangle, and beneath it, a note written in jagged handwriting. You haven't won. Not yet. Emily's hands started to shake. She looked up at Nathan, whose face had gone pale. Because Derek Pullman was in prison. Ryan Pullman was in federal custody, which meant someone else, someone they hadn't identified, someone still out there, was coming for her. Nathan called Marshall before Emily could even close the box. The detective arrived within 15 minutes, followed by 2 FBI agents and a bomb disposal technician. They cordoned off the front yard, examined the package with portable X-ray equipment, and finally declared it safe. Special Agent Mendez photographed the flag and the note from every angle, then sealed both items in evidence bags. Her expression was darker than Emily had ever seen it. This isn't random, Mendez said. Someone with access to police merchandise sent this. Someone who knows you're deploying in 2 days. Emily's stomach twisted. How many people know that? Too many, Nathan said quietly. The hospital, your unit. Anyone who saw the deployment orders. Mendez pulled out her tablet and pulled up a file. We've been monitoring communications within the Pinehurst Police Department since Ryan Pullman's arrest. There's a private chat group, current and former officers. They've been discussing the trial, the sentencing, and you. She turned the screen toward Emily. The messages were vicious, calling Emily a liar, a traitor, worse. But one exchange, highlighted in yellow, made Emily's blood run cold. She's deploying soon. Won't be around to testify if anything else comes up. Good. Let her run. Someone should remind her what happens to people who cross the line. The timestamp was from yesterday, hours before the package arrived. Who wrote that? Emily asked. Mendez's jaw tightened. We're working on identifying the usernames. Most are using pseudonyms, but we've narrowed it down to 12 individuals, all with connections to Pullman. Nathan stepped closer. 12? How is that even possible? Because the department protected him for years, Mendez said bluntly. Pullman had allies, people who covered for him, backed his reports, vouched for him during internal reviews. They're invested in the narrative that he's the victim here. Emily felt something sharp and hot rise in her chest. So what do we do? Mendez met her gaze. We find out who sent this package, and we shut this down permanently. The FBI set up surveillance on Emily's house, monitoring every approach. Nathan wanted Emily to stay somewhere else, a hotel, Torres's place, anywhere but the house that was clearly being watched. But Emily refused. I have 48 hours before I leave, she said. I'm not spending them hiding. Nathan didn't argue. He knew better by now. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Nathan's breathing steady beside her, and thought about the flag in the evidence bag. The thin blue line, a symbol that was supposed to represent honor and service, twisted into a threat. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She grabbed it, expecting another unknown number. Instead, it was Captain Torres. Need you at Fort Campbell, 0600, bring Nathan. Emily's pulse quickened. She showed the message to Nathan, who sat up immediately. What does she want? He asked. Emily shook her head. I don't know. They arrived at Fort Campbell as the sun was rising, the base coming alive with morning formations and vehicle movements. Torres met them at the gate, her uniform crisp and her expression unreadable. Follow me, she said. She led them to a secure briefing room in the Legal Affairs building. Inside, Colonel Park was waiting, along with two people Emily didn't recognize, a man in a dark suit with a Department of Justice badge clipped to his belt, and a woman in Army CID insignia. Torres closed the door. Sergeant Warren, Dr. Hale, this is Assistant U.S. Attorney Kenneth Reyes and Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Vance from Criminal Investigation Command. Emily's stomach dropped. What's going on? Reyes gestured to the chairs. Please sit. Emily and Nathan sat. Torres remained standing near the door. Reyes opened a folder and slid a document across the table. We've been conducting a parallel investigation into the Pinehurst Police Department for the past 6 weeks. What started as a corruption probe expanded when your case became public. Emily stared at the document. It was a federal indictment, pages and pages of charges against multiple defendants. We've identified a pattern of civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and witness intimidation within the department, Reyes continued. Derek Pullman wasn't an isolated bad actor. He was part of a systemic problem. Nathan leaned forward. How many officers are involved? 16, Vance said, including 3 supervisors who actively covered for Pullman and others like him. Emily's mind reeled. 16 officers, a quarter of the department's sworn personnel. The chat group Agent Mendez showed you yesterday? Reyes said. That was the entry point. We obtained warrants, traced the communications, and found evidence of coordinated efforts to discredit witnesses, suppress complaints, and retaliate against civilians who filed grievances. Emily's hands clenched on the armrests. Did you find who sent the package? Vance nodded. Officer Marcus Crane. He's been with the department for 12 years. He was Derek Pullman's training officer. The name hit Emily like a fist. Crane. She'd seen it in the case files, one of the supervisors who'd vouched for Pullman during internal reviews, who'd written glowing evaluations despite the complaints. "Where is he now?" Nathan asked. "In custody," Reyes said, "along with 4 others. We executed arrest warrants this morning." Emily felt the room tilt. "This morning?" Reyes's expression was grim. "We moved fast because we had intelligence that Crane was planning to escalate. The package was a warning, but we intercepted messages indicating he was preparing to do more than threaten." Torres spoke for the first time. "He was going to try to stop you from deploying." The words hung in the air like smoke. Emily's throat tightened. "How?" Vance slid another document across the table. It was a surveillance log. Photographs, timestamps, location data. Emily saw images of herself leaving the hospital, arriving home, walking to her car. Every movement tracked and documented. "Crane had been following you for 2 weeks," Vance said. "We believe he was waiting for an opportunity to confront you alone." Nathan's face went white. "To do what?" Reyes didn't sugarcoat it. "To harm her. Possibly worse." The room went silent. Emily stared at the photographs, at the proof that someone had been hunting her, and felt something cold settle in her chest. "Why didn't you warn us?" Nathan's voice was barely controlled fury. "We couldn't risk tipping him off," Reyes said. "If Crane knew we were watching, he would have gone underground. We needed to catch him in the act." "So you used Emily as bait," Nathan said flatly. Torres stepped forward. "We had surveillance on Crane 24/7. He was never going to get close to her." "But he could have," Nathan shot back. "What if something went wrong? What if he'd moved faster than you anticipated?" Reyes met his gaze. "Then we would have intervened. But Dr. Hale, you need to understand, this case is bigger than one threat. We're dismantling a network that's been operating for years. If we'd moved too soon, the others would have scattered." Emily finally found her voice. "What happens now?" "Crane and the others are being charged federally," Reyes said. "Civil rights violations, conspiracy, witness tampering. If convicted, they're looking at significant prison time." Vance added, "The Pinehurst Police Department is also under federal oversight. The state attorney general is reviewing the department's policies and practices. This is going to reshape law enforcement in this county." Emily absorbed the information slowly. 16 officers arrested, a federal investigation, systemic reform. It was more than she'd ever imagined when she'd pressed charges against Pullman. "I need you to testify," Reyes said. "At the federal trial, your case is the cornerstone of the prosecution." Emily looked at Nathan, then at Torres. "When?" 8 months from now. After your deployment." Emily's breath caught. 8 months. She'd be overseas, unreachable. But when she came back, she'd have to relive everything again, on a bigger stage, with higher stakes. "I'll do it," she said. Reyes nodded. "Good. We'll coordinate with Captain Torres to arrange your testimony via secure video link if necessary." The meeting ended, and Emily and Nathan walked out into the cold morning air. The sun had fully risen now, bathing the base in pale winter light. Emily felt hollowed out, scraped clean. Nathan took her hand. "You okay?" Emily shook her head. "No, but I will be." They drove back to Pinehurst in silence. When they arrived, the street was swarming with news vans. Word of the arrests had leaked, and reporters were scrambling for statements. Nathan pulled into the garage and closed the door before anyone could approach. Inside the house, Emily turned on the television. Every channel was covering the story. Breaking news banners scrolled across the screen. Federal arrests in Pinehurst PD, corruption probe expands, 16 officers charged. Emily watched as footage played, officers being led out of the station in handcuffs, their faces blurred but their shame unmistakable. Marcus Crane was among them, his expression defiant even as federal agents guided him into a waiting vehicle. The anchor's voice was grave. This morning's arrests stem from an investigation that began after the assault of Emily Warren, a nurse and Army reservist, by former officer Derek Pullman. Sources say the probe uncovered a pattern of abuse and cover-up within the department spanning nearly a decade. Nathan muted the television. "The whole country's watching." Emily nodded. She thought about the petition calling for her termination, the emails accusing her of lying, the voices that had told her to stay quiet. and she thought about the 16 officers who'd believed they were untouchable. Her phone rang. It was Helen from the hospital. "Emily, I just wanted to check on you. Are you safe?" "I'm fine," Emily said. "Nathan's with me." Helen's voice was tight with emotion. "What they did, what they were planning to do, it's unconscionable. The hospital board met this morning. We're issuing a formal statement supporting you and condemning the department's actions." Emily's throat tightened. "Thank you. You're one of us," Helen said simply, "and we protect our own." The call ended and Emily sat on the couch, staring at the muted television. Nathan sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Tomorrow's your last day," he said quietly. Emily nodded. Tomorrow she'd report to Fort Campbell for final processing. The day after, she'd be on a plane. 12 months away from all of this. The trials, the threats, the media circus. Part of her was relieved. Part of her felt like she was abandoning the fight halfway through. "You're not running," Nathan said, as if reading her mind. "You're serving. There's a difference." Emily leaned into him. "I know." The next morning, Emily woke before dawn. She dressed in her uniform, the first time she'd worn it since the assault, and stood in front of the mirror. The reflection staring back at her was both familiar and foreign. The nurse was still there underneath the fatigues, but so was the soldier. Nathan drove her to Fort Campbell. They didn't talk much during the drive. There wasn't much left to say. At the base, Emily went through processing, gear checks, medical screenings, final briefings. Captain Torres found her during lunch. "How are you holding up?" Torres asked. Emily shrugged. "I'm still standing." Torres smiled slightly. "That's all that matters." She handed Emily a folder. "This came through this morning. Thought you'd want to see it." Emily opened the folder. Inside was a letter from the Department of Justice. It was addressed to her directly, thanking her for her cooperation and courage. At the bottom, a handwritten note from Assistant U.S. Attorney Reyes. "Your testimony will change lives. Thank you for your service, both in uniform and out." Emily folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her pocket. That evening, Emily said goodbye to Nathan in the parking lot. He held her for a long time, his arms tight around her, and when he finally let go, his eyes were wet. "Come back safe," he said. "I will." Emily walked toward the deployment staging area, her duffel slung over her shoulder. She didn't look back. If she looked back, she'd lose her nerve. The transport plane left at midnight. Emily sat in the cargo hold with 40 other soldiers, the roar of the engines drowning out conversation. She closed her eyes and thought about everything she was leaving behind. Nathan, the hospital, the trials. And she thought about everything she'd accomplished. Pullman was in prison. Ryan Pullman was in federal custody. Marcus Crane and 15 others were facing federal charges. The system that had protected them was being dismantled piece by piece. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete. But it was justice. 8 months passed like a blur. Emily served her deployment in a field hospital near a coalition base, treating everything from combat injuries to local civilian emergencies. The work was brutal, relentless, but it gave her purpose. It reminded her why she'd joined the Army in the first place. To help people, to save lives, to make a difference. She spoke to Nathan every week via video call, their conversation stilted by the lag and the distance, but grounding nonetheless. He told her about the hospital, about the ongoing federal investigation, about the reforms being implemented in Pinehurst. And he told her about the trial date. The federal case against Crane and the others was scheduled for 2 weeks after her return. When Emily finally stepped off the plane at Fort Campbell 12 months later, Nathan was waiting on the tarmac. She dropped her duffel and ran to him, and when he wrapped his arms around her, she finally let herself cry. They drove home through familiar streets that felt both unchanged and completely different. The hospital looked the same, the house looked the same, but Emily knew she wasn't the same person who'd left. The federal trial began on a Monday in late March. The courthouse was packed, media, protesters, families of the accused. Emily walked in wearing her dress uniform, her service ribbons displayed on her chest. Captain Torres walked beside her, a silent show of support. Inside, the courtroom was tense. Marcus Crane and the other defendants sat at the defense table, their lawyers huddled around them. Crane's face was hard, unreadable. He didn't look at Emily. Assistant U.S. Attorney Reyes stood and began his opening statement. He outlined the evidence, the chat logs, the surveillance, the pattern of abuse and cover-up. He described a department that had systematically violated the rights of civilians for years, protecting officers who broke the law and punishing those who spoke out. Then he called Emily to the stand. Emily walked to the witness box, raised her right hand, and swore to tell the truth. Reyes approached slowly, his expression kind. "Ms. Warren, can you describe what happened on the night of December 15th? Emily took a breath. Then she told her story, calmly, clearly, leaving nothing out. She described Pullman's grip on her throat, the badge he'd ignored, the crowd he'd dismissed. She described the fear, the helplessness, the certainty that no one would stop him. And she described what came after, the threats, the harassment, the package on her doorstep, the realization that Pullman wasn't alone, that the system had protected him and others like him for years. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Crane's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He was older, sharp-eyed, and he wasted no time. "Ms. Warren, you filed charges against Officer Pullman. You pursued a criminal trial. You gave interviews to the media. Isn't it possible that the threats you received were the result of your own actions, of making yourself a public figure?" Emily met his gaze. "I didn't make myself a public figure. The video did. And the video exists because Officer Pullman assaulted me. But you chose to press charges. I chose to tell the truth." The lawyer shifted tactics. "You're in the military. You've been trained in combat, in handling high-stress situations. Isn't it possible you overreacted to what was a routine police encounter?" Emily's jaw tightened. "There was nothing routine about being choked in a parking lot," the lawyer pressed. "But you're a trained medic. You've seen violence, trauma. Surely you've dealt with worse." Emily leaned forward. "I've saved lives in combat zones. I've held soldiers together while waiting for medevac. I've seen the worst humanity has to offer. And none of that changes the fact that Officer Pullman assaulted me for no reason and that Officer Crane and the others tried to cover it up." The lawyer opened his mouth, then closed it. He glanced at the jury, then back at Emily. "No further questions." Emily stepped down. As she walked back to her seat, she caught Crane's eye. For the first time, she saw something other than defiance. She saw fear. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witness after witness took the stand. Civilians who'd been harassed, officers who'd tried to report misconduct and been silenced, experts who analyzed the chat logs and surveillance data. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdicts came fast. Guilty on all counts for Marcus Crane. Guilty for the 3 supervisors who'd covered for Pullman. Guilty for 8 of the 12 officers charged with civil rights violations. 4 were acquitted. Insufficient evidence, the judge said. But 12 convictions out of 16 was a landslide. Crane was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The supervisors got 6 years each. The other officers received sentences ranging from 2 to 5 years, depending on their involvement. And the Pinehurst Police Department was placed under a federal consent decree, mandating body cameras, independent oversight, and comprehensive retraining for every officer. Emily sat in the courtroom and watched as Crane was led away in handcuffs. He looked smaller now, diminished. The man who'd stalked her, threatened her, tried to silence her, was just another criminal being processed into the system. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Emily gave a brief statement, thanking the prosecutors, the FBI, the community members who'd stood by her. She didn't gloat, she didn't celebrate. She simply said, "This is what accountability looks like." Nathan drove her home, and they sat in the driveway for a long time, neither of them speaking. Finally, Emily said, "It's really over." Nathan nodded. "It's really over." They went inside, and Emily changed out of her uniform. She hung it in the closet carefully, smoothing the fabric. Then she pulled on jeans and a sweater and walked into the kitchen where Nathan was making dinner. For the first time in 18 months, Emily felt like she could breathe. The next morning, she returned to Riverside General. Helen met her at the entrance, and the entire ER staff was waiting. They decorated the nurses' station with a banner that read, "Welcome back." Diane hugged her so tightly Emily's ribs ached. "We missed you," Diane said. Emily smiled. "I missed you too." She clocked in, changed into scrubs, and stepped back into the rhythm of the ER. It felt like coming home. But at the end of her shift, as Emily walked out through the automatic doors into the parking lot, she paused. The spot where Pullman had pinned her against the pillar was still there, the concrete unchanged, the overhead lights still buzzing. Emily walked over and stood in the exact place she'd stood that night. She closed her eyes and remembered the fear, the helplessness, the certainty that she was powerless. Then she opened her eyes and looked around. The parking lot was quiet. No threats, no shadows, just an empty stretch of asphalt under the stars. Emily turned and walked to her car. She got in, started the engine, and drove home. And she didn't look back. But 2 days later, Emily received a call from Agent Mendez. "We need to talk," Mendez said. "In person." Emily met her at a coffee shop downtown. Mendez slid a folder across the table, her expression grim. "We found something during the final sweep of Crane's communications," Mendez said. "Messages between him and someone outside the department. Someone we haven't identified yet." Emily's stomach dropped. "What kind of messages?" Mendez opened the folder. Inside were screenshots of encrypted chats. Emily scanned them, her pulse quickening. "She's back from deployment. Trial's over. Time to finish this." "Agreed. But we wait. Let her think it's over." "How long?" "Until she stops looking over her shoulder." The last message was time-stamped from 3 days ago. After the convictions. After the sentencing. Emily looked up at Mendez. "Who is this?" Mendez's jaw was tight. "We don't know. The account's routed through multiple VPNs, but Emily—" She paused. "Whoever this is, they're not done." Emily stared at the screenshots, her coffee going cold in her hand. The messages were chilling in their patience, calculated, methodical, waiting for her guard to drop. "How many people have access to these chats?" Emily asked. Mendez's expression was dark. "That's the problem. The encryption's military grade. Whoever this is knows how to stay hidden." "Military," Emily repeated. The word settled heavy in her chest. "You think it's someone from my unit?" "We're not ruling anything out." Mendez pulled out her tablet and opened a file. "We've been cross-referencing everyone with knowledge of your deployment schedule, your return date, the trial timeline. That's a narrow list, maybe 30 people." Nathan appeared at the coffee shop door. Emily had texted him the moment Mendez called, and he'd driven straight from the hospital. He sat down, saw the folder, and his face went pale. "What now?" he asked. Mendez closed the tablet. "Now we set a trap." The plan was simple and dangerous in equal measure. Emily would continue her normal routine: work, home, the grocery store, the gym. But she'd be wearing a wire, and a surveillance team would shadow her every move. If the unknown threat made contact, they'd have audio, video, and a tactical response team ready to move. Emily hated it, hated being bait again, but she also knew this was the only way to end it permanently. "How long?" Emily asked. "As long as it takes," Mendez said. "Days, weeks. We wait until they make a move." Nathan's jaw tightened. "And if they don't make a move? If they just watch and wait?" Mendez met his gaze. "Then we keep looking, but Emily, you need to understand, this person is motivated by something deeper than loyalty to Pullman or Crane. This is personal." Emily thought about everyone she'd encountered over the past 18 months. The officers who'd stared at her in court. The protesters who'd called her a liar. The strangers who'd sent emails wishing her harm. Any one of them could be behind this. Or it could be someone she'd never suspected at all. The wire was small, no bigger than a button, clipped to Emily's scrubs beneath her ID badge. The surveillance team consisted of 4 agents in rotating shifts, monitoring from unmarked vehicles parked within visual range of wherever Emily went. For 3 days, nothing happened. Emily worked her shifts at Riverside General, came home to Nathan, and tried to pretend her life was normal. But every conversation felt performative, every interaction staged. She found herself analyzing strangers in the ER, the man with the broken arm, the woman with chest pain, wondering if they were watching her, waiting. On the 4th day, Emily was restocking supplies when Diane approached. "You've got a visitor," Diane said quietly. "Says he knows you from the army." Emily's pulse spiked. She touched the wire beneath her badge, a subtle signal to the surveillance team, and followed Diane to the waiting room. The man standing there was in his 50s, wearing civilian clothes, but carrying himself with unmistakable military bearing. He had close-cropped gray hair and a face weathered by years in the field. Emily didn't recognize him. "Sergeant Warren," he said, extending his hand. "Retired Master Sergeant Paul Hendricks. I served with your CO, Colonel Park, back in the day." Emily shook his hand cautiously. "What can I do for you?" Hendricks glanced around the busy ER. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" Emily led him to a consultation room, leaving the door slightly ajar. The wire would pick up everything. Hendricks sat down heavily. "I heard about what happened to you. The assault, the trial. Hell of a thing." Emily waited, saying nothing. "I also heard you're getting threats," Hendricks continued. "Messages from someone who doesn't want to let this go." Emily's stomach tightened. "How do you know about that?" Hendricks pulled out his phone and set it on the table. "Because I know who's sending them." Emily's breath caught. "Who?" Hendricks tapped the screen and a photograph appeared. It showed a man in a Pinehurst Police Department uniform, younger than the others, maybe late 20s. He had dark hair, sharp features, and eyes that held the same coldness Emily had seen in Pullman. "Officer Jordan Wick," Hendricks said. "He's Pullman's nephew, son of Pullman's older sister. He joined the force 3 years ago, and Pullman mentored him personally." Emily's mind raced. Wick. She'd never heard the name in any of the investigations, never seen it in the case files. "Why didn't he come up in the federal probe?" Emily asked. "Because he's smart," Hendricks said. "He stayed off the chat groups, kept his communications verbal, never put anything in writing. But I know him. I trained him at Fort Benning before he left the Army to become a cop." Emily leaned forward. "Why are you telling me this?" Hendricks' expression hardened. "Because Wick called me last week. Tried to get information about you, where you were deployed, when you'd be back, what kind of security you had. I told him nothing. But the fact that he asked tells me he's planning something." Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. "Where is he now?" "That's the problem. He requested leave from the department 2 days ago, said it was family emergency. No one's seen him since." Emily stood abruptly. "I need to call the FBI." Hendricks caught her arm. "Wait, there's more." She sat back down, and Hendricks pulled up another photo. This one showed Wick standing beside Derek Pullman at what looked like a family gathering. Both men were smiling, arms around each other's shoulders. "Wick worshipped his uncle," Hendricks said. "Thought Pullman could do no wrong. When Pullman went to prison, Wick took it as a personal betrayal. Not by Pullman, but by you." Emily felt ice creep down her spine. "He blames me. He blames you for everything. The conviction, the federal investigation, the consent decree. In his mind, you destroyed his family and his department." Emily's hand moved to the wire beneath her badge. The surveillance team would have heard all of this. They'd be moving already. "Why are you helping me?" Emily asked. Hendricks' face was grave. "Because I've seen what happens when soldiers go bad, when they use their training for the wrong reasons. Wick's dangerous, Sergeant, and if he's coming for you, you need to be ready." The consultation room door opened, and Agent Mendez stepped inside with 2 tactical agents behind her. "Master Sergeant Hendricks," Mendez said, "we need you to come with us." Hendricks stood slowly, raising his hands. "I'm not armed, and I'm not your enemy." "We'll determine that," Mendez said. She turned to Emily. "You're coming too. We're moving you to a secure location." Emily shook her head. "If Wick's out there, moving me just delays the confrontation. I say we bring him in now." Mendez's expression was tight. "We don't know where he is." Hendricks cleared his throat. "I might." Everyone turned to look at him. "Wick has a hunting cabin about 40 miles north of here," Hendricks said. "Remote, off-grid. He used to go there when he needed to think. If he's planning something, that's where he'd stage it." Mendez pulled out her phone and made a call. Within minutes, a tactical team was assembling. Emily insisted on going with them. "Absolutely not," Nathan said when he arrived at the hospital. Mendez had called him the moment they moved Emily to a secure conference room. "I need to be there," Emily said. "You need to be safe," Nathan countered. "Let the FBI handle this." Emily looked at him, at the fear in his eyes, the exhaustion etched into his face. She understood. He'd spent 18 months watching her fight, watching her suffer, and now he just wanted it to be over. But Emily knew it wouldn't be over until she faced Jordan Wick directly. "I'm going," she said quietly. "Not to confront him, not to put myself in danger, but to be there when they bring him in. I need to see this through to the end." Nathan started to argue, then stopped. He knew that tone. Knew there was no changing her mind. "Then I'm coming too," he said. Mendez shook her head. "Dr. Hale, this is a federal operation. Civilians, I'm not staying behind," Nathan said flatly. "You want Emily's cooperation, you bring me along." Mendez sighed. "You stay in the vehicle, both of you, no exceptions." They left Pinehurst in a convoy, 3 black SUVs carrying FBI tactical agents, with Emily and Nathan in the second vehicle. Mendez sat in the front seat, communicating with the team via encrypted radio. The drive took an hour. They left the highway and followed increasingly narrow roads into dense forest. Finally, they turned onto a dirt track that wound between towering pines. The cabin appeared ahead, a small structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. A single vehicle was parked outside, a mud-splattered pickup truck. Mendez raised a hand and the convoy stopped 100 yards away. "Target vehicle matches the registration for Jordan Wick," she said into her radio. "Proceed with caution." The tactical team exited their vehicles silently, moving in coordinated formation toward the cabin. Emily watched through the windshield, her heart pounding. The agents reached the porch. One of them knocked on the door. Nothing. He knocked again, louder. "FBI, Jordan Wick, we have a warrant for your arrest. Open the door." Silence. Then, a single gunshot. Emily flinched. Nathan grabbed her hand. The tactical team scattered, taking cover behind trees and vehicles. Mendez spoke urgently into her radio. "Single shot fired, unknown if directed at agents or self-inflicted. Hold position." The seconds stretched into minutes. Emily's breath came shallow and fast. She thought about Wick inside the cabin, armed and cornered, and she wondered what he was thinking, whether he was preparing to fight or to end it on his own terms. Another shot rang out. This time, the agents moved. They breached the door with a ram and stormed inside, their shouts muffled by distance. Then, silence. Mendez's radio crackled. "Suspect down. Single GSW to the head. Self-inflicted. Scene secure." Emily closed her eyes. Nathan's hand tightened on hers. "It's over," he whispered. But Emily didn't feel relief. She felt hollow. They waited while the scene was processed. Paramedics arrived, then the county coroner. Agents moved in and out of the cabin carrying evidence bags and taking photographs. Finally, Mendez returned to the vehicle. "Wick's dead," she said. "Looks like he shot himself when he realized we'd found him. We recovered his phone, laptop, and a stockpile of surveillance equipment. We'll need time to analyze everything, but initial findings confirm he was the one sending the messages." Emily stared at the cabin. Why didn't he just leave, disappear? Mendez's expression was sad. Because he didn't want to run. He wanted revenge. And when he couldn't have it, he chose this. They drove back to Pinehurst in silence. Emily watched the forest give way to farmland, then to suburbs, then to the familiar streets of the town that had become her battlefield. When they reached Riverside General, Mendez turned in her seat. "It's finished, Emily. No more threats, no more shadows. Wick was the last one." Emily nodded, but the words felt distant. Nathan drove her home. They sat in the driveway for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled. "Are you okay?" Nathan asked. Emily thought about the question. Was she okay? A man was dead. A man who'd wanted to kill her, but still. Pullman was in prison. Ryan Pullman was in federal custody. Crane and the others were convicted, and Wick had taken his own life rather than face accountability. "I don't know," Emily said honestly. Nathan took her hand. "You will be." The next morning, Emily woke to find the news already spreading. Jordan Wick's death was front-page news, the final chapter in a story that had gripped the region for over a year. Reporters called it the end of a dark era and justice finally complete. Emily didn't feel like it was complete. She felt exhausted. But she got up, got dressed, and went to work. At Riverside General, the atmosphere had shifted. People still looked at Emily, but the expressions were different now. Not pity or sympathy, but respect. She'd survived. She'd fought back. She'd won. Helen pulled her aside during her lunch break. The hospital board wants to do something for you. A commendation, a ceremony, something to acknowledge what you've been through. Emily shook her head. I don't need that. Maybe not, Helen said, but we do. You change things, Emily, not just here, but across the entire county. The reforms, the oversight, the accountability, that's because of you. Emily looked down at her hands. I just wanted to be left alone. Helen smiled sadly. And now you can be. That evening, Emily and Nathan sat on their porch as the sun set. The air was warm, spring finally giving way to early summer. The street was quiet, the news vans long gone. Nathan handed her a glass of wine. Torres called. She wants to know if you'll speak at a veterans event next month. Emily took a sip. What kind of event? Panel on advocacy and service. She thinks your story would resonate. Emily considered it. For 18 months, her story had been told by others, reporters, prosecutors, commentators. Maybe it was time to tell it herself. I'll think about it, she said. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood come alive with evening routines, kids on bikes, dogs being walked, the distant sound of a lawnmower. Normal, simple, safe. Emily's phone buzzed, a text from Diane. Drinks tomorrow after shift? The whole crew wants to celebrate you coming back. Emily smiled and typed back. I'll be there. She set down her phone and looked at Nathan. I think I'm ready to move forward. Nathan squeezed her hand. Good, because I have something to show you. He went inside and returned with a folder. Emily opened it and found architectural plans, an addition to Riverside General, a new wing dedicated to trauma recovery and victim advocacy. The board approved it last week, Nathan said. They want to name it after you. Emily's throat tightened. Nathan, you don't have to decide now. But Emily, what you went through, what you survived, it matters. And this center will help other people who are going through the same thing. Victims of assault, witnesses facing retaliation, anyone who needs support. Emily stared at the plans. The Emily Warren Center for Trauma Advocacy. It felt surreal, seeing her name attached to something so permanent. I'll think about it, she said again. But she already knew her answer. 1 month later, Emily stood at a podium in front of 200 people. The veterans event was larger than she'd expected, held in a convention center downtown. Torres sat in the front row, along with Nathan, Helen, and Diane. Emily gripped the edges of the podium and looked out at the audience. My name is Emily Warren, she began. And 18 months ago, I was assaulted in a hospital parking lot by a police officer who thought he could get away with it. The room was silent. Emily told her story, all of it. The assault, the trial, the threats, the federal investigation. She talked about the fear, the anger, the moments when she'd wanted to give up. And she talked about the people who'd stood beside her, Nathan, Torres, the witnesses, the prosecutors. I didn't fight alone, Emily said. And that's the most important thing I can tell you. When the system fails, when the people in power protect the wrong ones, you don't have to face it by yourself. You find your allies, you document everything, you tell your story, and you don't stop until you're heard. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. People stood, their faces reflecting everything Emily had felt, pain, anger, hope. Torres found her afterward. You did good, Sergeant, Emily smiled. Thank you for pushing me to do this. You didn't need pushing, Torres said. You just needed to be ready. Emily looked around the room, at the veterans and advocates and survivors who'd come to hear her speak. She thought about Pullman in prison, Crane behind bars, Wick dead, and the system that had protected them dismantled. She thought about the Emily Warren Center that would open next year, offering support to people who needed it most. And she thought about the nurse who'd walked out of the ER 18 months ago, just wanting 5 seconds of silence. That nurse was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, harder, but also more certain of who she was and what she could endure. 6 months later, the Pinehurst Police Department held a public ceremony to formally acknowledge the reforms implemented under the federal consent decree. Emily was invited to attend. She almost declined, but Nathan convinced her to go. The ceremony was held at City Hall in a room packed with community members, activists, and police officers. The new chief, a woman brought in from outside the department, stood at the podium and spoke about accountability, transparency, and rebuilding trust. Then she called Emily to the stage. Emily walked up slowly, unsure what to expect. The chief handed her a framed document. "This is a formal apology from the Pinehurst Police Department for the assault you suffered and the failures that allowed it to happen. It's signed by every member of the current command staff and approved by the city council." Emily read the words, her vision blurring. The apology was clear, unequivocal, and public. "On behalf of this department," the chief said, "I want to thank you for your courage. You didn't just hold one officer accountable. You forced an entire system to change, and we're better for it." The room applauded. Emily looked out at the faces, some familiar, some not. And she realized that this was what closure looked like. Not revenge, not victory, just acknowledgement. After the ceremony, Emily stood outside City Hall with Nathan. The evening was cool, the sky streaked with orange and pink. "How do you feel?" Nathan asked. Emily thought about it. "Lighter." He smiled. "Good." They walked to their car and Emily glanced back at City Hall one last time. The building stood solid and imposing, a symbol of authority and power. But Emily wasn't afraid of it anymore. She got into the car, and Nathan drove them home through streets that no longer felt hostile. Past the hospital where she worked, past the courthouse where she'd testified, past the spot where it had all begun. When they reached the house, Emily paused before going inside. "What is it?" Nathan asked. Emily looked at him, at the man who'd stood beside her through everything, who'd fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. "I'm proud of us," she said. Nathan pulled her close. "Me too." They went inside together, closing the door on the past and stepping into whatever came next. The Emily Warren Center for Trauma Advocacy opened the following spring. Emily attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony, standing beside hospital staff, community leaders, and survivors who'd come to see the space that would offer them support. The center had dedicated counselors, legal advocates, and medical professionals trained to help victims navigate the aftermath of assault and violence. It had private consultation rooms, support groups, and a 24-hour hotline. And on the wall in the main lobby, there was a plaque with Emily's words from the veterans event. "You don't have to face it alone." Emily ran her fingers over the engraved letters, then stepped back. Helen stood beside her. "This is going to save lives," Helen said. Emily nodded. "I hope so." She thought about the 16-year-old kid she'd saved the night Pullman assaulted her. Thought about all the patients she'd treated over the years, all the lives she'd held in her hands. This center was an extension of that, saving people not just from physical trauma, but from the aftermath, from the fear and isolation that came when the system failed them. Emily walked through the center, greeting staff and volunteers. At the back, she found a quiet room with windows overlooking the hospital parking lot. The spot where it had happened was visible from here, the concrete pillar, the overhead lights, the ambulance bay. Emily stood at the window and looked down at it. For 18 months, that spot had haunted her, had represented everything she'd lost, her safety, her peace, her sense that the world was fundamentally just. But now, looking at it from this height, it looked small. Just a piece of pavement. Just a place where something terrible had happened, but where she'd also found the strength to fight back. Emily turned away from the window and walked back into the center, where people were waiting to meet her, to thank her, to tell her their own stories. And she listened. To every word, to every tear, to every moment of pain and resilience. Because she understood. She'd been where they were, and she'd found her way through. That night, Emily came home to find Nathan in the kitchen, cooking dinner. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the house, warm and comforting. "How was the opening?" he asked. "Perfect," Emily said. Exactly what it needed to be. They ate dinner together, talking about work and the future and the small, ordinary moments that made up a life. No trials, no threats, no fear. Just two people who'd survived something terrible and chosen to build something better. Later, as Emily lay in bed beside Nathan, she thought about the journey, from that December night in the parking lot to this moment of peace. She thought about Pullman, serving his sentence in a cell that would be his home for the next decade, about Crane and the others facing the consequences of years of abuse, about Wick, who'd chosen death over accountability. And she thought about herself, the nurse who'd refused to stay silent, who'd stood up even when the cost was everything she had. Emily closed her eyes and let sleep take her. In the morning, she'd wake up and go back to work. She'd save lives in the ER. She'd mentor new nurses. She'd speak at events and advocate for reforms and continue building the legacies she'd started. But tonight, she rested, because she'd earned it, and because the fight, her fight, was finally truly over. The last thing Emily heard before sleep claimed her was Nathan's steady breathing beside her, and the quiet hum of a life returned to normal. Not the normal she'd had before. That was gone, shattered beyond repair. But a new normal. One built on strength, resilience, and the unshakable certainty that she'd faced the worst and survived. And that was enough.